Coming up on today's edition of Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about, our guest is Philip Weiss, financial advisor at Apprise Wealth Management.
And we're so excited to have Philip here today. He has a powerful story behind why he became a financial advisor and why he serves a female market.
Phil is one of our Purse Strings approved professionals. And as you know, we vet all of our professionals to ensure they are knowledgeable about what women are up against. They lead with education and will never push a product, and they are professional, full-time, and in it for the long haul, which means you can always count on them to be there for you.
Yes, and at Purse Strings, we serve a female market, but we look for men or women who are financial professionals who align with our community.
So let's get started and learn all about Phil Weiss.
Steinem once said, "We will never solve the feminization of power until we solve the masculinity of wealth." Barbara Provost and Maggie Nielsen are the team at Purse Strings that will help you navigate the ins and outs of financial independence so that you can be financially fearless. This is Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about.
So hello, Phil. Welcome. We are so glad to have you on the podcast today. Before we dive in, you want to share with the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Happy to, and thanks for having me today. Really, really happy to be here today. My background, I started my career, I'm a CPA. I was a tax professional. I worked for Deloitte, and I ended up specializing in international corporate tax planning. So we used to hear these stories about money that was trapped overseas and we couldn't get it back. The planning that I did was kind of what helped put it there, because when you looked at the different tax rates, we did structures to try to help companies bring back money effectively, but also we put in these structures that lowered their overall tax rate. Then I decided I didn't really want to do that anymore. So I tell people I got tired of telling companies how to shuffle paper around to increase the size of the national debt, because if in a cynical view, that's what not paying as much in taxes does. And it really does happen where just like where title transfers to a good changes how it's taxed. So I left that and I was writing for the Motley Fool when they had online portfolios. I learned about the CFA and said, that's my ticket out of the tax department. So I started working for that. I got a job while I was doing that for T. Rowe Price, where I was a writer and editor. I left T. Rowe and I became an analyst. I covered the energy sector, so like oil and gas stocks, for 7 years. Then I went to work for a financial advisor, where I was primarily responsible for managing portfolios. I had gotten my CFA along the way, Chartered Financial Analyst designation. And then my other cynical comment is I decided I was tired of working for idiots. So I decided to be the idiot and I started my own firm. And that's how I got to Apprise. And then since I've been at Apprise, I've also become a registered life planner as well, which is to help deal with the emotional and the softer side of money instead of just making it all about the numbers.
Wow, that's kind of quite a journey. So yeah, I'm glad you're here with us today and got to this financial planning and part of this life planning, which we're going to dive into. But let's kind of start back, of your original money story. I know you had early experiences with money in your household, and that really impacted where you are today. And it's so true for many of us. And it's not readily apparent, from our upbringing, our cultures, religion, community, they all play a role in how we feel about managing our money. So could you share with our listeners a little bit about your money story?
I'd be happy to. And what you say is so true. When I did the life planning training, actually the first part is called the 7 stages of modern money maturity. And we kind of go through what those early money memories are. And a lot of them center around pain and innocence. And they grow, and as we get older and learn more, they can change. But so much of how we think about money goes back to when we're kids. So my story is, in my house, it was a traditional model. My father was responsible for taking care of the finances. My mother had primary responsibility for taking care of my sister and I, but my father was not good at it, and that's putting it mildly. We had unpaid bills. We had services like utilities, phones, electricity turned off. When I was old enough to drive, I remember having to go down to the local electric company to give them a check so that we could get our power turned back on. It was that bad. When it was time to go to college, I was told I could go anywhere I wanted, and I chose to go to Duke, and I was a psychology major, and I was going to go to medical school. My father didn't really pay, so I left after I had done a lot to stay into school, But after my third year, I left. I ended up moving across the country to Arizona. And then I decided to go back to, when I was ready to go back to school, I was no longer going to be a doctor because it just didn't make sense. I had done well in school, but not really well enough, I thought. And so I decided to study accounting, and I ended up going to Rutgers, coming back home and going to Rutgers, and started work as an accountant. Like I said, I worked for Deloitte. And while I was doing that, I was living at home. The things with my father continued. One day I came home, I got the mail, and there were bills with my name on them, but they weren't mine. My father had forged my name to open up credit card accounts because he couldn't get credit. A little while later, we found out that my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And that was when we found out how bad things really were, because she asked me to help. I tried. It was so bad that, if you remember in the late 70s, early 80s, when interest rates were high teens, well, that's what my parents were paying at that point. And this was 1992, because of my father's bad credit. Those credit cards that he had forged, I got them out of my name, but since he had been paying on them, they let him keep the cards. Well, they were all behind. So while my mother's going through treatment, my parents had to sell their house that we lived in for over 20 years. They had to move someplace else.
They had to move because they couldn't afford it?
So I did try to help.
Why?
They couldn't afford it. I mean, they were probably going to get foreclosed on because of what was owed on the house too.
Okay.
It was just the combination of all those things.
Okay.
Because it wasn't really the bills at that point. It was more the situation that they were in. And I did try to help, but unfortunately my mother, her cancer metastasized to her brain, and she passed 18 months after her diagnosis. So now, where I am today with my firm, I work with women facing new beginnings. And the motivation for that, for me, is to try to keep other women from going through the things that my mother experienced and do my best to do that. And so actually, we talk about life planning. It's the first element of my life plan. And I've started this, but not formally, but I've started to put the money away for it, is to create a scholarship for women who go back to school later in my life. Because I did leave that part out. Before my mother got sick, she went back to school and became an occupational therapist, which was what she was doing, I know, so that she could be able to survive and thrive on her own. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to.
Wow, I just have like goosebumps right now. And you could tell your mom was just so strong, going back to school, trying to raise the kids, but then, trying to beat cancer as well. It's a lot to take on for sure.
Yes.
So
definitely
let's touch on this whole thing around your dad taking out credit card in your name, because, we know people today, friends of ours, people that we know in our circle, that's happened to them. And, you don't want that to be your story for life. So how do you get out of that situation when a parent or somebody gets a hold of they must have gotten a hold of your social security number or whatever, and were able to do that. So how did you get out of that?
So what I did is there were 2 or 3 cards that he did this with. And I called them and I said, I don't think these are mine. Right. I knew they weren't, but right. And I asked them if they could send me the applications.
Oh.
One of the banks didn't. One did. And when I got it, I knew my father's handwriting. Mm-hmm. So what I thought was true, I knew was true at that point because I recognized the handwriting. And since I told them they weren't mine, they took the cards out of my name and they let him keep them because, as I said before, he had been paying on them. So since they were okay with the payment history, they let him keep the cards. But they were now out of my name because I said, these aren't mine. Yeah. And I knew, like I said, I had proof. But when I told them that, they took them out of my name and put them in his.
And so what did you say to your dad?
I confronted him about it and I got him to admit it. I mean, it was easy to do when I had one of them, which was Citibank. They're the ones that send it back to me. And I said, here's the application. I know you did this. So there was no way he could deny it because I had the proof.
That's so something that like now you would just open kind of on your phone or something like that. So you couldn't even kind of bring back that proof, which I think is so interesting is, when we go from like paper to electronic. And I just honestly don't think banks would be that willing today, to kind of trust you on that. But I'm so glad that they were, as it's, it's hard to say all this debt is not mine and for them to just be like, yeah, you're right. It's not, and move it over. which is so important, to consistently keep tabs on your credit score and different things like that, because most parents do know their kids' social security numbers. They're the first ones to kind of receive that information and know about it. And so I know many friends that this has happened to, and has become their debt and things that they have to keep their eye on, and is always kind of, you want to love your parent, but it's also like, can you not do that to my credit score? Like I'm trying to do, go to college or buy a house or just, get my own credit. Like, please don't do that to it.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point,
difficult.
Maggie. Yeah. Because how then did you get to go to school, Phil? I mean, if you had that kind of debt in your name and probably impacted your credit score, and where you went to school, I'm sure was not cheap.
So the credit cards actually were after school, but I will tell you that when I went back to school, I said I went back to Rutgers. And at that point, I knew that I was on my own. And so I had applied to Rutgers and University of Arizona because I lived in Tucson and I had residency in either place at that point. And I decided to get a better job coming out of Rutgers. And I did work. I worked 20 to 30 hours a week and went to school full time, but I still didn't have enough. So, those credit card checks that you get in the mail, if I didn't have enough money to pay rent, or if I didn't have enough money to pay tuition, I used one of those checks to pay for those bills. And I finished my first year of work and I saw how much I'd paid in interest over the past year. And I looked at that relative to my salary. I said, oh my God, I can't afford this. So I put in place a plan, which I didn't know it then, but now there's two different ways that people are supposed to attack credit card debt. Well, I chose one of the two just naturally, I guess. And I put in a plan to pay it off. And I had the good fortune to get sent on a assignment for 2 6-week stretches where I was out of town. So I had like no expenses. So I actually beat my target date for when all that would be paid off. And I've never paid credit card debt interest since. And the other thing that I did is the job that I had when I left Deloitte, that company got taken over. And I chose to leave and got a extra payment when I left. And I took that payment to pay off the last of the student loan debt that I did have and to buy the engagement ring that I gave my wife. So she married me and I was debt free, which was a big thing.
That's huge. And what I love about that story is you saw the debt, you put a plan in place, because we do talk about the snowball or the avalanche, which are two strategies to pay down debt, and you stuck to it and you paid it off, and any extra money you put towards it as well, which proves that you don't have to stay in revolving credit card debt. If you do put a plan in place, you can pay it off.
Absolutely. And I have had a few clients in those type of situations, and that's exactly what I talk about with them. And so sometimes I get mixed up, which is the snowball and which is the avalanche. But mine's the one I attack the one with the highest interest rate, because to me, that was the one that was costing me the most. And I also tell people, especially in today's world, everywhere you go, they want credit. You go put gas in your car, you pay by credit. You go get groceries, you pay by credit. So I said, once you pay off that first credit card, then make that the card that you use for those other things, knowing that you can pay it, because that way you're also stopping interest on other debt. Like I had a client that said that they had put a few $1,000s on a card that was paying gas. I said, well, you got to pay this off, because he told me he was paying 5 cents less because he used their credit card at this particular place. I said, but you owe all this money. So the 5 cents, you're spending way more than that on all the interest. So let's get a plan in place to get rid of this.
Yeah, that 22% interest is not gonna save you with that gas. Not at all. And just the dedication is so impressive, as it's so much easier to say you're going to make a plan and do the thing. But it's also, interesting just to see like those small opportunities. I mean, I get that if you're away for 6 weeks, your water bill's low, your electricity bill's low, all your meals are covered. And at that stage, when you're paying off that debt, that can be a huge breakthrough. And so I think sometimes it's like, yes, my paycheck stayed consistent, but there are other things that you can always look at as little benefits, and it adds up. I mean, it adds up or it takes it down, either way. And so I really like how you had that extra little break in there as well, and just realized how much that did help you.
I do want to say this about what you did though, Phil. So many times people look at debt as bad debt, but look, you really had to take on debt to get your degree. which really catapulted you further in your career. So that debt, although it was high interest or whatever, it wasn't really bad debt. It was debt that allowed you to really advance yourself and move yourself further along in your career. And then you created a strategy that paid it off. So I could see if somebody was just having, they were unconscious about too much spending, and then that was consistent behavior. But sometimes you need debt to get a car because it takes you to work. That's not bad debt. You need that to get you to a place of employment. Same thing with school, stuff like that. So we have to be cautious about the amount of debt we take, but we can't look at all debt as bad debt as well. I mean, come on, we take mortgages out, right? That's debt. So we have to be very conscientious of it, even though when we're taking it, we know it's a means to get you advanced somehow, but also you then put a plan in place to pay it off.
You're absolutely right. And I have had that thought. Like, I don't regret that I built up that debt because it did do just those things that you said. I also just remembered something that I forgot when I was talking. You asked me about the debt from when my father forged my name. The other element that I did as part of that was, at the time, my father made me pay. I was still living at home because I couldn't afford a whole lot of other things, right? My father was charging me rent to be at home. So I told him, fine, I'm going to pay you rent, but I'm not giving it to you. I'm giving it to the credit card companies. So the other element of getting those cards out of my name was I made sure the balances were paid in full. Then after that, it was up to the bank what they did with him, because it was gone from my perspective.
That's smart. Sometimes you got to be the parent, and you kept him in line. I like that. And so I know you said, to go back to original, your life planning, the first thing you start is with that money mindset or money story. And so we can see that you've had your own money story that you've definitely worked through and overcome. And now we're helping others. So what's kind of step 2 of this life planning process that you take people through?
So the whole process we refer to as E.V.O.K.E, which is an acronym. The first E is exploration. And it's kind of like, why are you here? Why do you want to go through this process? And what are the things that make up your most fulfilled life? That's what we're trying to find out. And it's a process that's much more listening than it is talking from the advisor perspective. I'll tell you that with the AI tools that we have now, when I do these calls on Zoom, most of the time when I have these life planning meetings, I'm talking about 20% of the time. My client's talking the rest of the time. It's their time. It's for me to listen. Then we get to V, which is vision. And the vision meeting, you get homework to do before the meeting, primarily consisting of 3 questions. The first question is basically, imagine that money was no object. What would you do, and how would you live your life? And here you can let your mind go free, think of anything you want. That one's kind of fun. But then we get to the second question. Now we put a time element, and money is a part of the equation. And now it's this time you go to the doctor and you get the unfortunate news that you have 5 to 10 years left to live. The good news is you're not ever going to feel sick. The bad news is you don't know when you're going to go in that 5 to 10 years. Now what would you do, and how would you live your life? And then the third question is the one that's the hardest of all, because this time you go to the doctor and you find out today's the day. This is your last day. Now it's not what you're going to do or what are you going to do. It's what did you not get to do, and who did you not get to be? And so some people think about that as a question of regret. To me, it's not regret. It's about avoiding regret. It's like I mentioned that the first step in my life plan is to create this scholarship. Well, if I can think about that now and start doing that now, it's not meant to sound selfish, but I get to enjoy and see the benefit that comes from that. There's other elements in my life plan too that, I want to travel, right? Certain kind of travel that I want to do. I want to make sure that my kids, that my wife and I give our kids make sure our kids have a good life, right? And I also, I chose the name Apprise for my firm because that means inform, and so education's important. So educating others about finance is also part of my life plan. So I can do all those things now, as opposed to getting to the end of life and saying, damn, I didn't do that. Right. So it's really about figuring out those things. And so you think that some people say, I want to be a grandparent. Well, if something happened to me tomorrow, I wouldn't be a grandparent. But what I can do is I can be the best parent I possibly can to my kids, so that if something does happen to me, they can remember me fondly and still tell good stories about me to their kids, so that I might not be with them, but at least I still have the opportunity, you still can be thought of in the right way.
That's really powerful.
I love that. Those are great. Yeah, those are great questions to be asking and to be thinking about. Because, we always think, time is kind of unlimited and money is our only barrier, which really time's our barrier. Money we can always find more of.
And then that was visions. The vision also comes with an exercise called Heart's Core Grid, which is the things that you want to have, do, and be, and the things that you'd love to do, that you ought to do, and that you want to do. And that's a 3x3 grid. And then there's a goals for life exercise. Then from there, we go to the next meeting is obstacles. So now it's a series of questions about what could possibly get in the way. And I love that part of it, because when I start to ask those questions, I literally can see the wheels inside people's heads spinning as they try and think about what they can do to avoid keep those obstacles from getting in the way of achieving their goals. Then the K is knowledge. So that's where my role as a financial advisor really comes into play, because now it's to help them put in the steps that they need to do those things, and also to make sure that the things that are most important, because that's really what this is all about, is identifying the things that are most important, put them in place so that they can achieve those. And then E is let's go out and execute and live your plan.
Wow. What's so powerful about that is it's a way of being very conscious about why you're doing what you're doing and what you're saving for and investing for, without just, squirreling away money without really knowing, I don't know, they just told me I need to save, so I'm saving. It's very purposeful.
Mm-hmm. As I said, one of my clients that was one of my early life planning clients. So when I got back from that training, that part of the training is the E.V.O.K.E. training, was in Hawaii, because George Kinder, it's the Kinder Institute that put this process in place. And so we had training at his home in Hana. When I came home, I blogged about, yeah.
Got to go get some training in Hawaii. I guess I should be a life planner too.
But I came home and I blogged about my life plan, and this client read it, and she was going through a lot of things. And she said, I finally took the time to read this. Thank you. Because I've been sitting here trying to do just what Barb said, build that big pile of money. But I never thought about what it was for, how much I needed, and any of those things. And by doing this, now she had a better understanding. To me, it's all about, this process helps you align what you spend your money on with what matters to you. Like if you looked at your checkbook and went through your expenses, how many of those expenses do you care about? What are you doing that you don't need to do? Like you can do, there's certain things, if it means a lot to you to go get that latte, go get it. Just remember that there might be something else you can't do because you did. And if that's what matters to you, that's perfect. But just think about it that way.
Definitely. It's more than just spending where you spend your time. It's also where you spend your money and, allocating that to your values. And so, it's so important no matter what age you're at. If you're planning for retirement or, if you're younger as well, it has to do with everyday spending and who you really add up to be. And it was interesting because we kind of had a question like this in our Facebook group of like, have you talked with your financial professional of like what you want your retirement to look like? Or has it just been stashing away the money, And some people are like, well, 30 years ago, the world looked a lot different. I can't tell you what 30 years from now is going to look like. I don't know how to plan for that, so I am just kind of stashing away, but I know once the time comes closer. But some people said, yeah, they've never really thought about it, which is so important because, if your retirement is planning on traveling every month, that's way different than owning a farm and doing some fishing. It's just a different cost, and neither is right or wrong, but what's so important to you.
Purse Strings offers an available for hire network of vetted professionals who specialize in serving women. When you have a life event that has suddenly made money a priority, you can now move forward with a whole new confidence that you're getting advice and services from savvy professionals who are uniquely equipped to serve your needs. Go to pursestrings.co and use our directory of handpicked financial professionals when you're ready to plan for retirement, navigate divorce, buy your next home, fire up your new business, and more. Go to pursestrings.co or check the link in the show notes. Now you can be financially fearless.
Phil, let me ask you this question. At what point in your business did you decide to really focus on the female market? Was it from the very beginning based on your life story, or can you share a little bit about that?
Happy to. It wasn't from the beginning. So I knew going in the idea that having a niche of some sort is a good thing. And when I was a tax professional, I worked with, being from New Jersey originally, I worked with a lot of healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies and things like that. So I'm like, I want to work with healthcare professionals. But trying to build a niche without having already started to develop it is really hard. And one of my friends said to me a couple times, she goes, Phil, you should work with more women. And one of the times when she said this to me, I'm like, I think I do. I think that's like a third of my client base. And I looked at it and it wasn't a third, it was 2/3. And it happened by itself. And I used to call it female-led households, but that was too broad. So now it became women-facing new beginnings, which can be, and by new beginnings, like that is, some people just think transition, but new beginnings is a more brighter, more optimistic way to say it, first of all. But it's really divorce, widowhood, empty nest, and retirement. Those are kind of like the 4 major events that I think of. And I really think that the life planning work, when you're facing those life changes, being able to do life planning is part of it. So many times when I'm talking to a client, it might be somebody that I was working with before that we didn't do life planning. Like the client I was talking to just before we got on. They're at a point in life where they need to think more about these things. I'm like, let's do life planning, because I think you're trying to figure out what you want to do. You got a bunch of choices. Let's do this, and this will help you narrow it down and figure out what really matters.
And so what was the results when you worked with her about that?
A few things. One, she and her husband had been working both. She was an executive for a healthcare company, and her husband also is an executive and they both have really good jobs, and they've been living on one salary. So we did her life plan, and now she's sort of retired. Like she has to keep busy, right? But she's not, she left that job that when she reached out to me and we started her life plan, her story was that her older daughter had started college that year. Her younger daughter was in high school. There were times she was so stressed by work and the family situation and everything else that she took a 12-week leave from work. And that's when we started her life plan. After we finished her life plan, she had to go back for a little bit, and then she stopped working. She does a lot of things. So she's keeping busy, but it's all like entrepreneurial stuff. She has rental properties that she has. She's actually going to work for the Cubs, which is something that she wanted to do from when she was when she was much younger. And so on a whim, she saw an advertisement, and now she's going to work for the Cubs.
That's like Barb's dream.
It is my dream. And put that on my life plan.
And she's also become like a raving fan of mine. And so I was out visiting with her and her friends this past weekend. And when we started talking about the 3 questions, we did a women's circle. And when we started talking about the 3 questions, she told her friends that going through these with them changed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just amazing. And I'm not surprised either. I mean, going through those questions, and if you actually sit down and do them, like, they are life-changing. They bring a whole new perspective. And if you're taking 12 weeks off work, something is not working right. And so I'm glad she was able to kind of dive into that deeper, and not just ignore that, and really then go find what she wants to do. I mean, if you have plenty of money, if you always want to work for the Cubs, go do it, girl. Go do it.
Yes, she told me that. I said, you're living your life. And I got back 100%.
Awesome. That's
what we all have to be doing. It's so important for us to be living our lives. It's so important.
Yeah.
It really is.
So let's wrap up with a few tips that you might have for women and for them to move to the next step.
So I will tell you one thing I have done too, and if you go to my website, you can get it, is I have an ebook that I've written about how to go through life's big changes and how to flourish through them. And if you go to my website, which is apprisewealth.com, and you put a /ebook at the end, you'll be able to download an ebook that has 5 steps that you can take. And the first one of those steps is life planning. So I think a lot of times people ask me, when should I start working with a financial advisor? And my answer is yesterday. And I don't mean, and that doesn't mean it has to be me, right? But it's just the idea that to have somebody that you can go through these issues with, to partner with, to work on them with, is really important, to put good practices in place. I firmly believe that you want to work with somebody who's a fiduciary that'll put your interests ahead of their own, that doesn't sell you products or any of those type of things. But also, like, one of the things that I love about this work is I get to know my clients. It's not just a relationship about numbers or anything else. It's truly about getting to know them. You know, I've had clients that have one of my clients tells me that her daughters, or she has twins, and they're juniors in high school. And we're talking about like where they can afford to send them to school. And I've never met the daughters, but they know my name and they'll say to their mom, "So is this okay with Phil? Is Phil going to let us do this?" Like, I don't have anything to do with it. Like, I say that, but I don't tell you what to do, but I help you figure out what's best for you to do and what you want to do, and make sure that you, like I said, do those things that are really important. I think those are really good. I think working with a life planner, I think, is really invaluable, right? Working with somebody that's going to listen, right? And a lot of times when you have couples, financial advisors are notorious for focusing on the man. You want to make sure that it's somebody that's going to talk to you and listen to you. I always make sure, like, one of the things I do when I life plan too, when I'm doing it with a couple, I usually know which one is less comfortable. So that's the one that I make go first, right? The one that's less talkative, that's less in control of the finances. I make them go first. I'll tell you, I even did this recently with my sister. My sister's getting remarried and decided to work with me. So I life planned her and her soon-to-be husband. And it was quite an interesting experience, I'll say. It was interesting in two ways. One, because when I asked some of the talk about the early money memories, to hear my sister's perspective and see where they might be different, where they're the same. And there was a lot of overlap, just to make sure, like, I'm not exaggerating and things like that. But also listening to him, I almost felt like I was a father, and her intended was coming to me and asking if it was okay. It wasn't that way, but it almost felt like that, just because of the level of questions, and like it was good. I mean, it's a really good experience, but it's very different.
Mm-hmm. And that seems like a great experience to do, before you're getting married. And I love your example of like the girls going to college, is that shows like, mom has a financial advisor. We should have a financial advisor. It's good to talk to others about these things. We're not siloed. And so these examples are so great, just even teaching lessons to the kids, or, just premarital things of stuff that you should be talking about. You never usually ask people like, what's your money story? Unless you're on this podcast. And so it's great that they got to share that with each other. And it's fun to see. I live with my brother, so it's fun to see how our stories play out differently, even though we came from the same story. Just to see what we picked up on, or the way we respond to those things is cool just to see as a sibling, and just as like a psychology interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always think, I think of it too this way, that anybody in theory could do what I do. But to me, you have to have, and I'll use another acronym, KIT. You have to have the knowledge. Right. You have to have the interest. And then the hardest one of all, especially as our lives get more complicated, you have to have the time. Mm-hmm. And that's the one that's most important. And like, when I think about time, I love to tell this story. When we moved into the house that I'm living in now, I bought the tractor from the woman that owned the house before me. I'm like, I'm going to cut the grass. I'm going to use this tractor. And the only good part of it was that when I did it, my kids were really small at the time, and they'd sit on my lap and I'd go around. But it was taking me over 3 hours, and I wasn't getting done. I'd end up, the tractor wasn't big enough, is what I found out later. I didn't know. But my wife found somebody that would cut our grass for $40. Yeah, right. And I knew he wasn't going to take 3 hours, but let's see. I don't care if it takes him 15 minutes. It took me 3 hours. Yeah. And I'm going to pay him $40. My time is worth so much more than that. Please go cut my grass. I'm done. And then I sold the tractor. I'm really done.
Awesome. Yeah, we have to really do those evaluations on ourselves, right? Where's our time best spent? Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this has been packed with great information. So Phil, I appreciate you, being vulnerable and sharing your story, but also sharing your process of how you work with so many other great women, as it is life-changing. And so I hope some people listening to this either, give you a call, or we always say, just take some action to move forward, as every little step really adds up. So whether that's downloading the ebook, giving Phil a call, calling any of our other professionals, or just sharing the podcast with a friend, we got to keep these conversations going and be taking small actions. So is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure is shared?
I think we covered everything. And the one thing I'll just say is have conversations. I think that we've come to this point where it's easier to talk about sex than it is about money. There's so many taboos about money, and we don't want to talk about it with each other. We don't want to talk about it with our kids. And financial education isn't good. So as parents, we're the ones that have to help our kids understand these things and make sure that they understand how important they are. It's funny, my second son started a job in August, at the end of August, with Amazon. He's working in web services. And one morning I walked in and I looked and I saw that he had fully funded his Roth IRA for the year.
Wow.
I was like, wow, I did something right.
Yes. It's paying off, Phil.
He didn't ask, he just did it. Yeah. So have those conversations. You don't have to necessarily tell them how much, but give them an idea and give them education, because our school systems don't do a good job of it. Some do a little bit, but they don't get into all of it.
Right.
And it's really important. So educate your kids.
Yeah,
definitely.
And if you work with an advisor, they can talk to your kids too if you're not comfortable, if you don't think you know.
Either way, you got to jump in and keep talking about this shit.
That's right.
But yeah, we appreciate you coming on today, Phil, and sharing your expertise. We'll have links in the show notes, of course, to Phil's profile page, as well as his ebook and all his other social media, so you can give him a follow. Be sure to take action, leave a review, as that really helps us grow, and be financially fearless. Talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.